Welcome to Good Screenwriting. I'm Trevor Meyer, and today we're going to talk about Blade Runner 2049. Oh my god. Alright, so this movie makes me sad, and I'll tell you why. I, as a film buff, as a film student, I loved it. I give it a 5 out of 5. I rank it almost on par with the first Blade Runner, which I also, as a viewer, would give a 5 out of 5. Here's the problem. Both Blade Runner and its sequel, Blade Runner 2049, which is true to the original, are financial failures. Okay? So if they set out to make a movie that's true to the original, they succeeded because it's going to flop at the box office. And that bums me out so much because when it comes to look, the reviews are great. If you go on Rotten Tomatoes, you're going to see that the reviews are up in the 80s for both critics and audiences for the second movie, up in the 90s for the first movie. So when I see stuff like that, where a movie gets really good reviews but doesn't make its money back, it bothers me. And that happened with Logan Lucky earlier this year. Got great reviews, didn't make any money. So the only way I can find out why this movie didn't make its money back, based purely on screenwriting merits alone, because that's what we're teaching here. Um, I can't get into the marketing. I can't get into the hype, all of that stuff, because it's not relevant to what we're learning here. On a screenwriting level, the only way to combat a weak opening would be to have overwhelmingly good reviews coming out of the theater and people saying, you got to go see this, you got to go see this. And then it could maybe have long enough legs to keep going for, months and months and months, making more and more money and eventually recoup its losses. But that's not going to happen at its current rate of dropping off. So what's the problem? The only way I can look at, the only thing I can look at to find out why this is not working is to look at the negative audience reviews, because those are the people who are going out there and spreading the word of mouth. And it's the indication that the movie's not perfect. As I say, if a movie scores 85%, there's a 15% gap between that and perfection. Okay? So in order for this movie to have gotten the kind of money that it needs, it needed to be closer to perfect. So what was missing? Every single negative review I read said the same thing. It's slow. It's too slow and boring. Okay? Now, again, I'm a film buff, so that bugs the crap out of me when people say that. I'm like, that's such a millennial thing to say. Do you really gotta play the it's too slow, it's boring card? Except it's not a millennial thing. It's not, because I went and I read the reviews, the negative reviews for the first Blade Runner. Same thing. Same thing. The only reason people don't like the first Blade Runner is because it's too slow. And I get that to a certain degree. You could almost make the same claim about Alien, but Alien eventually picks up, all right, which is another Ridley Scott movie. Alien eventually turns into a horror movie, and everyone loves horror movies. Plus, I think they were able to do it cheaper because they had a small cast, it's a confined set. They controlled their budget. This movie reminds me a lot of Drive, which also starred Ryan Gosling, to the point where I feel like they took his character from Drive and dropped him into this movie. Um, um, I'm going to give a spoiler alert here for both Blade Runner 2049 and Drive, okay? I'm going to give away the ending of both movies. So if you don't want to know, you might have to stop here. Long story short, if I'm being honest, as a screenwriting teacher, you should not try to emulate this movie. You should take elements from it, but don't try to do what this one did, because you're going to fail financially. So on that level alone, I have to rate this movie a 3 out of 5. rather than a 5 out of 5 as a film nerd, as a fan of the first movie. But as a teacher and a screenwriting coach, I have to give this a 3 out of 5 because I don't want you to write something like this and have something underperform and not know why. All right? Now, that being said, we're going into spoiler territory in 5 seconds, okay? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At the end of this movie, they do a great reversal of expectations. You expect Ryan Gosling to carry the torch forward and Harrison Ford to, be killed off like he does in some of his other movies. Because, look, you got Tron Legacy, you've got Star Wars The Force Awakens, you've got Terminator Genesis or Terminator 6, which is coming out later, which may be doing the same thing. It's all about passing the torch on to the next generation. And this movie saw that pattern and subverted it because you introduced this new lead character to take over the franchise, and in the end, he dies and Harrison Ford lives. So that's just kind of a fun thing. This is really turning out to be more of an analysis than a review. I don't know how many of the details of the actual film I'm going to get into. It's more of an analysis of why it didn't work commercially. But at the end of Drive, you have Ryan Gosling. He's been stabbed in the side or in the belly by the main villain, and then he stabs the main villain back. Villain dies, and he kind of survives, at least for a while. So you got Ryan Gosling at the end of Drive sitting in the front seat of his car, and it's a long take, long take. He stabs the main bad guy. He's bleeding from his gut. He sits in the driver's seat of his car, and he doesn't blink for like 30 seconds, and you're like, oh, he's dead. And then he finally does blink, and he starts the car and he drives away. So now, when I saw the movie, it seemed to be ambiguous whether he actually lived or died, because it almost seemed like he just died, and then at a certain moment when he blinks, he's actually in the afterlife and he gets to drive forever, and that's his kind of afterlife. Blade Runner 2049, same damn ending. He fights the villain of the movie, who is not Jared Leto. Jared Leto, I don't think, is the main villain of the movie. He might be. But more of the conflict happens with his henchwoman, who is the one who's going around killing people. So they fight each other. She stabs him in the side, and he eventually, we get to the end of the movie where he's laying on a bunch of stone steps, staring up at the sky, and it's snowing. It's not raining, it's snowing. And we hear the same score called Tears in Rain from when Roy Batty dies in the first movie. And we just see Ryan Gosling blinking, and then he stops blinking. And that's the last time we see him. So they even used almost the same ending as Drive, and he plays almost the same character as Drive, to the point where there's a song from the end credits of Drive called A Real Hero. And the lyrics are, you have proved to be a real human being and a real hero. And I thought, screw it, just put that song at the end of Blade Runner 2049. It actually applies more to 2049 than it did to Drive. So, now, when I thought about that, I was thinking, okay, Drive, that got great reviews, that made its money back. Why does the same style of filmmaking not work for a big budget movie like this? And what occurred to me was that, yes, Drive did make its money back. It also only cost $15 million to make. So if it costs $15 million and it makes $78 million, yeah, it's in good shape. If a movie like Blade Runner 2049 makes $78 million using the same formula, it's going to tank because it costs 10 times as much. All right? So Drive cost $15 million. This cost $150 million. Okay? So you can't aim for a niche indie audience when you're spending that kind of money. The more money you spend on a film, the more you have to cater to the desires of the masses. All right? And that's not a bad thing. I've said before that your audience is your customer base. All right? You're selling a product. You can make it a really great product and it can be artistically sound, but in the end, people are paying their hard earned money to see these movies. All right? And you got to give them at least, if not what they're asking for, what they want and maybe don't even know it. So I like indie movies. I like Drive. Drive is a great movie. I like that atmospheric, tonal, kind of off the beaten path style of filmmaking. And Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 use that same style of filmmaking, except they spend a lot of money to do it. And it doesn't work because most people are not into that kind of filmmaking. You know who's into it? Screenwriters and film buffs like us, all right? We like it, so we may not understand everybody else, but go watch it with your wife or your girlfriend, and they'll say, what is this movie? This is stupid. I don't get it. It's not meant for them. It's meant for us, but our audience is too small. All right. So, what I would say is, uh, what can you learn from this? Unfortunately, not much. You should not aspire to write a film like this because it's a perfect trap. It's a perfect disaster. It's a $150 million art house film that's doomed to fail. Um, if you're going to write a low budget movie, absolutely. Use some of those atmospheric character beats, like in Drive. If you're going to write a big budget sci-fi action movie, you gotta look at the highest grossing movies of all time. You gotta look at Avatar, you gotta look at Titanic, you gotta look at Star Wars The Force Awakens, okay? The Avengers, Jurassic World. You gotta look at all of those movies to see what people really want, because they're telling you, all right? It's not a big mystery. Go watch those movies. They're telling you what they want, okay? So they don't want some piece of art, okay? They want to be entertained. And if you're not willing to do that, you can't spend this much money on the film, all right? You can't even make a film like this for less money, unfortunately. The thing that makes it so beautiful is the visual effects, and this I watched. It was sort of a double feature type thing. I watched Blade Runner at home, and then I went to the theater and I watched Blade Runner 2049. And it's incredible how this is like the longest gap between sequels or prequels in film history, I believe. 35 years. I don't think we've ever had a 35-year gap between movies, all right? You can spread it out like it's like you had Return of the Jedi, and then later you have The Force Awakens, but in between you had the prequels, all right? It didn't go away for 35 years. This did go away for 35 years, and it's the most distant sequel I've ever seen. But you run them back to back, it's like they made them 5 years apart. The visual effects are completely in line with the first movie. The storyline, again, I'm not talking much about the storyline. It's more of a philosophy, because again, I don't actually want you to take too much away from this movie. You can watch it, you can enjoy it, you can love it, but don't try to write anything like it because it's not going to work. It's not going to be economically viable. I'm glad it exists. It's inspiring. It's among the most inspiring movies I've seen this year as far as my own creativity goes. But this style of filmmaking doesn't work. All right? Unfortunately. It makes me sad. It bums me out, but I got to remember I'm not making films for other filmmakers. I'm making films for people, regular people who don't actually appreciate this higher form of filmmaking. All right? So, that being said, again, as a teacher, as a screenwriting teacher, I have to give this a 3 out of 5 because it's not commercially feasible. It's not something that you should try to emulate. All right? But that being said, they put a lot of effort into this movie and they put a lot of work into this movie. So I would recommend if you like, look, it's pretty simple. If you like the first one, you're going to like the second one. If you don't like the first one, you are not going to like the second one because it is so true to the original and it's so perfectly in line with the original that you already know before you go in whether or not you're going to like it. Okay? So let me know. If you go see this movie, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. All right? This is Good Screenwriting, and I'm Trevor Meyer. See you next time.